Canada is facing a sustained effort to convince Canadians that nothing their country accomplishes is real, and no institutions can be trusted, and everyone outside the conservative movement is lying to them.
And we've watched that strategy transform down south in American politics. Donald Trump does not have to disprove an inconvenient fact. He simply calls it fake, repeats the word until his supporters accept it, and then attacks anyone who asks for evidence.
Now, Pierre Poilievre is using the same method in Canada. He's not carefully separating completed contracts from agreements under negotiation. He's just throwing all of them into one pile, calls the pile fake, and uses the anger that follows to keep his political base activated.
So today, we're going to test the claim properly. What has actually been signed? What is still being negotiated? And why would a political party want Canadians to believe that every international agreement is imaginary?
Mark Carney became Prime Minister in March 2025 as Donald Trump was imposing tariffs around the world. He was threatening Canadian industries and treating access to the American markets as leverage over Canadians.
Yeah, and Prime Minister Carney responded by setting a goal of doubling Canada's non-U.S. exports over the next decade. The work involves three connecting parts: finding new customers, building the infrastructure required to reach them, and creating more industrial capacity inside of Canada.
The $200 billion Pacific Plan is the perfect example. It brings those parts together. On July 2nd, Ottawa announced agreements involving British Columbia, Alberta, Indigenous partners, and private industry that could catalyze more than $200 billion in direct investment.
Ports, tunnels, and transmission lines are not ceremonial announcements. They determine whether Canadian products can physically reach the new markets that Carney is opening overseas.
The plan also includes 4 LNG projects and a proposed West Coast pipeline capable of carrying up to 1 million barrels of heavy crude a day.
The proposed West Coast pipeline is still subject to review, and British Columbia has not endorsed the project itself. Consultation remains necessary, and the proposal, it can still change.
But a project being under review does not make it fake. It means the government has moved it into a formal process. And listen, PP, that's how major infrastructure projects are supposed to work.
You've been in office for 20 years. You should at least know that. Now, the most important point here is the connection between the infrastructure and the customers. Canada is trying to build routes, the supply, and the industrial capacity required to sell more products outside of the U.S. Calling the entire Pacific Plan fake ignores the funding commitments, regulatory process, provincial agreements, and private investment that is behind it.
And Carney is also lining up customers for the energy and minerals that would move through this infrastructure. Japan, for example, is preparing more of its refinery systems to produce the heavier Canadian crude.
Japan currently depends heavily on Middle Eastern oil traveling through vulnerable shipping routes like the Strait of Hormuz. Canadian oil offers another source from a stable partner, while Trans Mountain gives Alberta direct access to the Pacific.
And yes, the oil relationship is still developing. It's not a completed government purchase agreement yet, but Japanese companies do not invest in refinery capacity for a supply relationship they expect to abandon next week.
Yeah, Canada and Japan have also announced more than $1 billion in critical mineral agreements between companies in both countries. Japan gains a secure supply of materials needed for batteries, electronics, and defense systems, while Canada gains investment and another major industrial customer.
There's a lot going on, and Ottawa is putting up $400 million into strategic metals productions at Teck's Trail Smelter in British Columbia. Canada will be able to process more of these minerals here instead of exporting the raw materials and buying back higher value products.
The relationship with the Philippines is another part of the plan. Carney and President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. elevated the relationship to a strategic partnership covering trade, energy, minerals, security, labor, and migration.
Canada and the Philippines are working toward completing a free trade agreement by the end of 2026. And Indonesia, they're already further along. Canada and Indonesia signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement that will reduce or eliminate tariffs on more than 95% of current Canadian exports once it's fully implemented.
Yeah, we're talking Canadian wheat, potash, soybeans, wood, and other products. They'll become more competitive in a country of roughly 285 million people. This is a formal trade agreement with measurable tariff reductions. And India, they provide another clear test of that conservative claim as well. Prime Minister Carney reopened a badly damaged relationship and resumed work towards a broader trade agreement with India.
And then India signed a $2.6 billion contract with Saskatoon-based Cameco for nearly 22 million pounds of Canadian uranium.
Canadian and Indian businesses announced another $5.5 billion in memorandums covering investment, energy, technology, and critical minerals.
And we can't forget China, yet another relationship where Prime Minister Carney secured a concrete result. China reduced its tariffs on Canadian canola seed to roughly 15% and lowered barriers affecting other agricultural and seafood products.
And Canada responded by allowing a limited quota of Chinese electric vehicles at the normal 6.1% tariff. And look at Saudi Arabia. That produced 13 commercial agreements and MOUs worth more than $1 billion across mining, health technology, infrastructure, education, energy, and defense.
Canada and Saudi Arabia also began negotiations on investment protection and double taxation. Canadian businesses are gaining access to a $1.8 trillion economy.
Now, we also need to take a look at defense because this is where the conservative claim becomes, it's even harder to sustain, really.
And since Carney took office, Canada has reached NATO's 2% spending target for the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Carney's government is using that spending to build Canadian industry and develop partnerships that reduce our dependence on the United States, which we sorely need to do.
Yes. Canada selected Germany's TKMS as the preferred supplier for up to 12 Type 212CD submarines. It will be the largest defense procurement in Canadian history.
Germany and Norway shifted their production schedules so Canada could receive its first 4 submarines in 2034. That's earlier than originally offered. And Canada will join a shared program using the same submarine training systems and maintenance approach as 2 close NATO allies.
And after all that, Poilievre's conservatives still called it a fake announcement. Their position now appears to be that procurement remains imaginary until the finished submarine services beside Parliament Hill or something like that.
He has also forgotten that Canada has signed a $2.5 billion agreement with Australia for over-the-horizon radar. Work began already on July 1st, and the first operational capability is targeted for December 2029.
At least 14 Canadian companies are expected to participate in this, supporting roughly 2,300 jobs annually for the first 5 years.
Between the strike missiles from Norway, the simulation center in British Columbia, jobs are being created from coast to coast to coast.
And while all this is happening, Canada is moving away from the US and strengthening its ties with Europe. Canada became the first non-European country admitted into the European Union's Safe Defense Initiative. That opens a European procurement market backed by more than $240 billion in financing to Canadian companies.
11 NATO countries have also chosen the Saab Global Eye as the alliance's next airborne surveillance platform. The aircraft underneath that system is Bombardier's Global 6500, manufactured right here in Canada.
These are all different types of accomplishments at different stages. Honest criticism requires examining each one on its merits.
But the mega approach avoids that work. It declares everything fake, attacks the people verifying the facts, and keeps supporters angry enough that they stop asking whether the story makes any sense at all.
And this is where Poilievre is taking the Conservative Party. Instead of helping Canada build a united response to American economic coercion, he is encouraging Canadians to distrust their own government's progress.
Trump wants Canadians to believe resistance is pointless. Poilievre wants Canadians to believe that Mark Carney's alternatives are fake. And both of those messages lead to the same place, that Canadians should stop resisting and accept that Washington gets to set the terms.
Sorry, not going to happen. Canada needs to reject that idea, regardless of which political party is in government. A country of more than 40 million people with enormous energy reserves, critical minerals, advanced industries, and strong global alliances does not have to behave like a dependent state.
Fighting mega influence does not mean becoming anti-American. Millions of Americans are fighting the same attacks on facts, democratic institutions, and national unity inside their own country.
But what it does mean is refusing to let Canadian politics become another contest over who can generate the most anger and distrust. It means demanding evidence, recognizing real accomplishments, and criticizing governments without trying to convince Canadians that their entire country is failing. And if the Conservative Party wants to govern Canada, it needs to decide whether its role is to strengthen the country or keep its supporters angry at it. The country's more important than any political party, and this is a moment when national unity has real economic and strategic value.
So we want to hear from you. Has the Conservative Party crossed the line from holding the Liberals accountable into undermining Canada's response to the Trump administration?
Leave your thoughts in the comments because we really want to hear what you had to say about this. Because us Canadians, we have to stick together.
And while you're there, check out the pinned comment for our Substack, private Facebook group, and other ways that you can support the channel.
And don't forget to like, hype, and share this video so more Canadians can join the conversation.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.